The United Kingdom is in serious trouble, but is it a sign of things to come in America? It just may be, and I will explain tonight on your favorite night of the week, The Deep End on Tim Hatch Live. Welcome in, everybody, as we are trying to move the deep end to Monday night. So I am glad that you are here. There is a lot of stuff that happens over the weekend from Friday onward, and we want to get to it as quick as possible and provide you news of the day or the week through a Christian worldview. My name is Tim, and this is The Deep End, episode 35 of season 7. So glad that you are here. Make sure that you're hitting the like button, the subscribe button, and click that notification bell so that you can get notified on your smart device every time we go live. Well, it is a crazy world out there. And before we get to this content, we've got to talk about the fact that all this content is for educational purposes only. And I say that for anybody listening to me from the government in the United Kingdom. Please don't arrest me for what I'm about to share, because it seems that the United Kingdom is sowing the wind to reap the whirlwind. And not just in the United Kingdom, but the West as a whole. We talk about this a lot on this channel. Western civilization had a nice run. It gave us scientific discovery, the university. It gave us the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution of the United States, freedom of expression, free speech, the freedom of the press, all those wonderful hallmarks of our liberal society because of Western civilization. Now at a precipice, now at a potential turning point. No, dare I say, end of the road, a dead end. As it seems, the UK has fallen. A 10-year-old kid was stabbed today in the streets of London. A mother and 11-year-old girl were stabbed last night. Several children were stabbed to death while attending a Taylor Swift-themed dance class last month by a Rwandan immigrant. And we have footage here on the screen of some of the unrest that is now active in the streets of, or many cities in England. Just unruly people acting crazy all over the country. Riots breaking out. People are scared. They don't know what to expect next. Where are the police? Where is the civil order? Who knows what's going on? Well, the citizens in the UK are pushing back. The patriots, if you will, those who've been long-suffering loyalists to the crown. They are forming protests, and the tension is thick. See, the citizens of the UK are tired of the decades of poor leadership with open borders based on the false notion of multiculturalism that has led to the utter ruin of the world's once great leading empire. What's happening in the UK may be a preview of coming attractions in America if you are paying attention to the news and politics here as well as there. You see, Europe as a whole has been selling its birthright for decades under the illusion that a postmodern secular utopia where all religions are equal, all worldviews matter, and tolerance is the golden rule of the day, and they have lost. Now an influx of Muslim migrants, legal and illegal, has the country reeling. People feel unsafe, and they are taking to the streets to make their voices heard. Here's a picture of a protest from the weekend in the UK. Here's a picture of police getting into a scuffle with a guy holding a traditional UK flag. I believe that's the King George flag, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see he's getting terrorized by the police. This is a picture of British journalist Tommy Robinson, who held a peaceful protest 2 weeks ago against mass immigration, and then he was arrested for terrorism. Meanwhile, again, terror reigns. Stabbings are common in a country that outlaws guns, by the way. Stabbings are happening on a regular basis. Now, this is the result. You have all of this protest because the people feel unsafe in their own country. If you feel unsafe, you will make your voice heard. In fact, I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said that riots are the voice of the unheard or the language of the unheard. Now, you might remember that back in 2020 in this country, I don't know if you can remember back that far, but politicians bent over backwards to talk about how we need to hear the voice of the rioters, the looters, the people burning down America's cities. Because ultimately, there must be a problem that we're not addressing. Is it a problem with policing? Do we need to understand the issues that black people face? And our country tried its best, and is still trying, to accomplish that mission. That was a noble endeavor, right? If there is injustice in policing, let's find out about it and let's fix it. So the riots in this country were responded to with examining policing practices and potential injustices against black people, as they should be. Well, as riots break out in the UK, the voice of the unheard, using Martin Luther King Jr.'s own words, the government seems to take the opposite track. Instead of finding out the root problems and hearing the voice of the rioters and what they are perhaps alarmed by, they've decided to arrest them for wrongthink. So you have continued examples like this. The man on the left killed a 14-year-old British boy with a machete. He was sentenced to prison in March and was released in 6 months, or is going to be released within 6 months. On the right is a man who commented on a Facebook post about a riot, and he will be facing prison for 20 months. And here you have the Director of Public Prosecutions of England and Wales, Stephen Parkinson, talking about what is unacceptable and criminal in UK at this moment. Watch.
The offence of incitement to racial hatred involves publishing or distributing material which is insulting or abusive, which is intended to or likely to start racial hatred. So if you retweet that, then you're republishing that, and then potentially you're committing that offence. And we do have dedicated police officers who are scouring social media. Their job is to look for this material and then follow up with identification, arrests, and so forth. Potentially
just causing people to act in a riotous manner. If you post something like that, you could be arrested. Even if you repost something just to inform friends or others of what's happening in the streets, you could be in danger of committing a criminal offense. Watch.
I'm joined by Matthew Thompson now to talk through this. So Matthew, the last point there is crucial, isn't it? Some people might be sharing simply to warn their friends, but it could be considered an offence because they're amplifying this.
Absolutely, and that's the key message, is that however you think you're acting innocently on social media, whatever platform it is, you're just sharing something for whatever reason, that could potentially be a criminal offence. And look, it's not an idle threat either, because the Crown Prosecution Service were keen to point out that they've made a number of charges in relation to stirring up of racial hatred online, one of which this morning was for distributing a recording that could, intending to stir up racial hatred. And so they are actually already bringing charges in relation to this sort of thing. So it's a very, very clear message based in the harsh reality, if you like, that if you do this kind of thing, you are potentially committing a criminal offence. There he said it. They've got teams of people scouring the internet looking for this sort of thing. And if you are in the business of sharing or retweeting, whatever platform it might be, potentially criminal material, well, then you could find yourself prosecuted.
Perhaps this show could come under fire from the UK government, as they are also going to commit to extraditing foreigners who potentially commit crimes in the same vein. Here we have the UK Police Commissioner threatening to extradite jail US citizens over online posts.
Talk to me about that, because we have seen some high-profile figures whipping up the hatred. You talked about it in there with the officers, in fact, about this being added to by online commentary. I mean, I'm even thinking of the likes of Elon Musk getting involved. What are you considering when it comes to dealing with people who are whipping up this kind of behaviour from behind a keyboard and maybe in a different country?
Being a keyboard warrior does not make you safe from the law. You can be guilty of offences of incitement, of stirring up racial hatred. There are numerous terrorist offences regarding the sort of publishing of material. All of those offences are in play if people are provoking hatred and violence on the streets, and we will come after those individuals just as we will physically confront on the streets the thugs and the yobs who are causing the problems for communities.
He doesn't say, no, we can't go after foreign citizens and arrest them for posting things about what's happening in our country. No, he just blatantly states, yeah, you're going to be arrested. We're coming after you if you post. So pray for my protection, friends. This video is extremely disturbing. This is a judge in the UK who is sentencing a man to 20 months in prison for a Facebook post. And just listen to the cold demeanor in which he administers this sentence.
You have been committed for sentence, having pleaded guilty to an offence of publishing written material which is threatening, abusive, or insulting.
Threatening, abusive, or insulting. So it doesn't have to be all three. Like, I get it. You can't maybe use your speech to threaten people and post things to Facebook to threaten individuals or entire groups of people. Perhaps we shouldn't allow that, right? But just insult them? Really?
Intending thereby to stir up racial hatred. The context of your offending is that it arises out of the civil unrest and disorder in many parts of the United Kingdom. On the night of the 2nd and 3rd of August, the Britannia Hotel in Leeds was attacked by people who threw missiles which damaged windows. The police were called, and on the 3rd of August the hotel was locked down for the protection of those who were living there. At the time there were 210 occupants, many of whom were foreign refugees and asylum seekers. Similar attacks to the hotel were launched on the 4th of August. The police attended on each occasion, and units were deployed to safeguard the hotel and to provide an increase in the police presence in the area. In between the two attacks, you took to social media in order to encourage others towards participation in the attacks upon the hotel. As is recognised on your behalf, this offence is so serious that an immediate custodial sentence is unavoidable. Would you stand, please?
So then he goes and sentences him to 20 months in prison for the Facebook post between those two activities, between those two events. Now, this is how you're going to be punished in the UK for just posting things on social media. They're not punishing those committing atrocities. They're not going after criminals. And they're not trying to close their borders. No, they're going after the real crime, the real offenders, the real disturbers of the peace. This meme is floating around on the internet. You have door 1, door 2, door 3. There's the policeman in the UK. Wondering which one should he crack down on? The people who have stabbed several people or sexually assaulted young girls? No, the ones who criticized immigrants on Facebook. That is what's happening across the pond. And it is a harbinger, I believe, for what America will see in the days, if not the days, in the years and perhaps maybe the decades to come. But good news, citizens of the UK, the federally sponsored educational system is here to help. Yes, they are going to start teaching children in public schools in the UK how to spot extremist content and misinformation. This is now going to be part of the curriculum of public schools in the United Kingdom. This is the consequence for bending over backwards to multiculturalism for decades in England and in Europe and in the West. I remember the days shortly after 9/11 when this country and pretty much every other westernized country did whatever it took not to blame Islam, to coddle Islamic ideologies, to then fight for the idea, the false idea, that Islam and Christianity and Hinduism and all these other religions are all basically the same. They all want peace. And if you say otherwise, you are a bigot. I remember seeing at the National Cathedral 2 days after the 9/11 attacks, Billy Graham at one pulpit, a Hindu priest in another pulpit, and a Muslim cleric next to them, as if to share with the world that all the religions of the world want peace and can live in harmony together. What a false claim that has turned out to be. Now, I knew it at the time it was false. I actually remember preaching a message about Islam shortly after 9/11. I remember there was a Muslim lady sitting in the church where I preached that word, and she actually came to Christ that night. The history of Islam is a history of violence. It's a history of occupation and dominance. It's a history of Sharia law being imposed upon the citizens of every country they rule. And when they take over a country, and it doesn't take much when they take over a country, they don't have to have the largest population numbers to take it over. But when they do, it's over for that country. And London is teetering on the brink. Now, consider the case that just happened in the Olympics. France, a second cousin to Britain, if you will, gave us news of anti-Christian bias this week as Christians riding a bus calling for the end of attacks on Christians were arrested and spent a night in jail simply for riding a bus that said, quote, "Stop attacks on Christians," end quote. That's right. This just happened during the Olympics in France. So you get onto a bus and you have on the bus the words "Stop attacking Christians," and that makes you a criminal in the country of France. If you post something wrongly on Facebook, something out of the approved sentiments of your government, that gets you arrested. That gets your freedoms restricted. Listen, friends, if you can't say certain things, you don't have freedoms. For speech and expression, these are the cornerstones of liberty. So when it comes to our elections, maybe we Americans should wake up, see what's happening across the pond, and choose politicians who support, well, I don't know, free speech. And that brings me to potential Vice President Tim Walz in this week's edition of Politics. So you probably know that Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, has been tagged by Her Highness Kamala Harris, who has been selected, not elected. She did not receive a single vote for the nomination of president by the Democratic Party. Nope. She was the replacement figure because they wanted to hold on to the money in the coffers of the Democratic National Convention to make sure that they could fund the media campaign blitz that we are now seeing to promote Vice President Kamala Harris to the presidency. And she tapped who we are discovering here on the deep end, the most liberal governor in the country. It makes Gavin Newsom look like Rush Limbaugh. I cannot believe the things that we have discovered here on the deep end, and I am here to share them with you now. Okay, let's talk about speech because it pertains to what we're seeing happen in England right now and our country. Where does Tim Walz stand on freedom of expression? Well, during the 2020 riots, he supported the violent destruction of public statues, such as a Christopher Columbus statue in Minnesota, claiming that it was the right of the rioters to make their voice heard. Here he is on that.
It was an act of civil disobedience that we need to make sure people feel that there is a proper outlet to address what are legitimate concerns around what they view as a genocidal monument that they have to walk to in their democracy.
Did you see what he said there? This was a legitimate expression based on their view. So, if you believe that Christopher Columbus was a homicidal maniac because you went to public school or public university, then you have the right to deface public property, to destroy it violently if necessary, because you are exercising your freedom of speech. But here he is talking about how if you question the information that the government hand down to you based on COVID restrictions, then no, we need to limit free speech. Listen.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
No right to freedom of speech when it comes to hate speech. If you can't say things that are hateful, you don't have the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is only as good as the most offensive thing you are willing to tolerate being said. Don't you understand that's how it works? That's the meaning of the word free? So I guess Tim Walz is for free speech when it comes to destroying monuments along across the state of Minnesota. But when it comes to questioning the standards that the government hands down to those during the COVID pandemic, well, then free speech must be restricted. Like during the COVID pandemic, remember when we were asking questions like, oh, I don't know, if it's not okay to go to church, then why are shoulder-to-shoulder BLM riots perfectly fine in the streets? Or if this virus is mostly fatal to those over 80, why are we shutting down schools in perpetuity? Or did governors like Chris Cuomo and Governor Walz here put people in nursing homes and endanger their lives, knowing full well that COVID was a great threat to them? And maybe this question, was the virus from a lab, seeing as there was an actual Wuhan coronavirus institute in Wuhan, China at the time of its outbreak? Or how about the question of how could hospitals be so overwhelmed and at the same time be completely empty, where we see TikTok dance competitions being filmed and posted almost every night during the lockdowns? Remember those days? Well, Governor Tim Walz believes that if you question those things, then free speech must be limited. Governor Tim Walz oversaw the complete destruction of his state. Remember, this is Minnesota. This is Minneapolis. Fires in storefronts, broken down entire neighborhoods, all in the name of social justice, all because a lifelong fentanyl addict, drug dealer, who resisted arrest for over an hour before he was kneeled on by an officer, wrongly so, and lost his life. This is what happened. All in the name of social justice. And then there's Tim Walz's wife, who talked about her experience during the protests of 2020 and how she kept the windows open of the governor's mansion so that she could smell the burning tires from the streets because it was just that important to do so. Watch.
I would say those first days, when there were riots, I could smell the burning tires. And that was a very real thing. And I kept the windows open for as long as I could because I felt like that was such a touchstone of what was happening.
I kept the windows of the governor's mansion open so that I could smell the burning tires. Have you ever smelled burning tires? It's disgusting. And this cuckoo clock thought that it was necessary to smell it up, to inhale the moment from all senses. The fact of the matter is that Tim Walz is a radical leftist. Now, here's an important question, and this is what pastoral commentary is for. How do you get to radical leftism from Western civilization? Because again, if Western civilization is built on the Christian narrative, the Judeo-Christian narrative, let's put it that way, how do you get to radical leftist views, socialist-friendly views in your country or in your policies when your country was founded on Judeo-Christian philosophy? First, you need a completely ineffective church devoid of any Orthodox Christian truth, not to be reporting that they found Tim Walz's church and it is exactly as heretical as you think it is. Here's the title. You may have already guessed that Communist VP nominee Tim Walz probably attends a psycho-lunatic communist church, and it turns out you're right. Pilgrim Lutheran Church in St. Paul is a comically over-the-top cliche fest of cringy Democrat talking points delivered by ponytail boomer hippies who think celebrating queerness and anti-racism is what Christianity is all about. And he is exactly correct in his assessment there. We found this video of a recent message or sermon given at Pilgrim Lutheran Church in St. Cloud, Minnesota, or St. Paul, Minnesota, and here's how that went down. Listen.
Trinity Sunday, I must confess I'm not much interested in reflecting on the sacred mystery of the Godhead. Three persons in one divinity, whatever that means. Like you, I am reeling from the rising gun violence in our country, and I see inability, even politically or culturally, to stem access to assault weapons or an love affair with violence. Like you, I am torn over the racial injustice, the roots of white supremacy that reach everywhere in our society, into our sinners, our own lives, and our determination to change the subject rather than repent. Like you, I am transfixed all over again by the spectacle of January 6th, the fragility of our democracy, and the rising threat of authoritarian white Christian nationalism that seems hell-bent on making America great again by erasing voting rights, reproductive rights, and pursuing the xenophobic assaults on all manner of civil rights.
Imagine you show up for the weekend that you're supposed to be talking about the Trinity, and the first thing the preacher gets up and says is, well, I'm not sure about the Trinity, but let's talk about the talking points, bullet point by bullet point, of the Democrat National Committee. That's literally what happens in most of these ELCA churches, Evangelical Lutheran Churches of America churches. And that's the kind of church that produces a Tim Walz, a radical left-leaning crazy man who wants to limit free speech in some cases, but not in others. Oh, and he's 100% on the LGBT bandwagon. We reported about this moment at a Minnesota Pride rally where a fat middle-aged dude in whitey-tighties twerked in front of children to the applause of onlookers. This is what they call freedom of expression in Minnesota. What on earth does a sick, fat pig like that have to do with children watching a parade in the streets of a city in our country? Nothing. This is sick degeneracy. And this is Tim Walz's Minnesota. And if you vote for him, you are going to be complicit with the degradation of our society in the future. And then there is this complete support for radical, limitless abortion by Tim Walz. I found this article in a First Things website, which I encourage you to go to. It is a Catholic website, but they are pro-life, and so I researched their website for findings. Tim Walz made sure to enact a law that would remove the necessary requirements to preserve the life and health of an infant born alive as a result of an abortion. He struck the whole line out of the law, and no care for the infant who is born alive is now required in Minnesota. Thank you, Tim Walz. Putting children to death who have been born alive because of a botched abortion. That is potentially the future vice president of our country. Then there's this article. Harris VP pick greenlit a law allowing state to take child custody from parents who oppose sex change surgeries. This is called the Trans Refuge Bill. It allows for temporary emergency jurisdiction if a parent denies their child sex change procedures. According to the bill's text, the bill defines interventions which include sex changes, hormone replacement, and cosmetic surgeries as medically necessary, so long as it respects the gender identity of the patient as experienced and defined by the child. A child defines their own reality, and if you question it, Tim Walz is here to take your child out of your home. This is the state becoming the nannies of your children. Oh, and by the way, another bill that he signed, an executive order actually that he signed, called it says "You Belong Here." Minnesota House passes Trans Health Refuge Bill. This actually directed state agencies and officials not to comply with other states' efforts to penalize out-of-state patients who travel to Minnesota to pursue gender-affirming care. So his state is a refuge state for removing children from parents who do not affirm their children's mental illness when it comes to their gender identity. And then there's this news. Tim Walz signed a bill that removed anti-pedophile language from a Human Rights Act. And we have the scratch out, the line outs right there of the language from the bill right on the screen so that you know. Okay? So the Take Pride Act sought to redefine sexual orientation in the Minnesota Human Rights Act, removing the explicit exclusion of pedophilia. In the original text of the law stated that sexual orientation does not include a physical or sexual attachment to children by an adult. End quote. However, the new law signed by Walz removes this crucial caveat, raising concerns about the potential implications for the protection of minors. Why remove the law? Why is that necessary? Why cross it out? Why not just leave it there and make sure that we specify for future generations? Because the law could be misinterpreted in future generations, as we've seen now in our country. Why not make sure that we specifically specify for all time in the language of the law that we are not talking about sexual acts between an adult and a minor? But you see the undergirding of Tim Walz's philosophy. Protect at all costs the radical leftist agenda that wants to take over American culture. Silence free speech on one side and allow it on another side. Also, Tim Walz backed a plan for taxpayers to fund college tuition for illegal immigrants. He gave He gave 81,000 Minnesota residents who are undocumented immigrants up to 120 credit hours of free tuition at state universities. So, you go to this country, you live in this country, you pay your taxes, and then you have to pay for schooling But if you don't live in this country and you don't pay taxes, then you get free schooling because of the generosity of the liberal governor, Tim Walz, in Minnesota. This guy is a kook. He is as radical far left as you can possibly get. I am amazed at this election by Kamala Harris. And he is perhaps the gateway drug of what we are seeing in the United Kingdom coming to America. Because it starts with a Christianity that is devoid of conviction, a Christianity that is more concerned with social justice ideologies, whether or not they're rooted in Scripture, than in the absolute freedoms of expression and speech. And we have more on Tim Walz's views on Christianity and the restriction of the freedoms of Christianity in the state during the COVID lockdowns in the extra content. Make sure you become a member of the Tim Hatch Live Dependables team. Let's talk about Kamala. Kamala has now graced the front page of Time magazine. She is the selected, not elected nominee for president for the Democratic Party. And we are seeing unprecedented fanfare on her behalf. Whether it is AI-generated imagery or not is not from my concern tonight. But I do want to talk about the fact that she does not have really any policy proposals on her website, nor has she sat down with the press, now 22 days into her nomination, to even talk about how she plans on governing. But she did finally say something that she agrees with. And so I call her Kamala, as in can't. As in Kamala can't develop her own ideas. The AP reporting Harris pledges to work to end taxes on tips for service industry employees, echoing the Trump vow. Now, the important question is, why wouldn't she just do it right now since she's in power with President Biden? Yes, she stole this policy proposal from Donald Trump directly. A couple of months ago, he called for no taxes on tips, and people started writing no tax on tips, vote Trump in their receipts for restaurants. And guess what? Turns out the Democrats like that policy. Now remember, they take this policy from Donald Trump, who is the greatest threat to democracy ever in our history. Well, except for his great policy proposal that we'll steal. Yes, literally, Kamala did the meme. the Mr. Bean meme cheating on the registration test. Now, this is how the news reports this kind of nonsense, because this is what really angers me. When NBC News reported on ending tip taxes, the title of the article, Restaurant Workers and Advocates Say It's a Low Priority. One labor group that favors higher base pay called Trump's proposal a fake solution, but urged Democrats to pay some more attention to cost of living issues. So that's how they report it when Trump comes up with the idea. So when Harris says she supports it, then it's just, yay, wonderful. Look at the progress that she's going to bring to the country. So I just remind you now, the only policy proposal that we have her speaking about clearly is lifted directly out of the Trump campaign. Oh, she is gliding her way to the presidency, friends. Now, it would be important to remember that in 2023, Harris cast the deciding vote in the Senate to pass the American Rescue Plan, which pumped tons of free money into the economy and which even President Obama advisors said contributed to inflation, which actually tightened the federal policy on tip reporting. That's right. The American Rescue Plan tightened the federal policy on waiters and waitresses reporting their tips. And who cast the deciding vote to make sure that law passed? Kamala. And then there's Kamala word salad. As I say, Kamala can't speak without a teleprompter. Here she is with President Biden right after they got those hostages released from Russia a couple of weeks ago. And just listen to her wax poetic about the value of diplomacy and the strength of diplomacy when we're doing diplomatic things in the name of diplomacy.
This is just an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy and strengthening alliances. This is an incredible day.
So, the future of the Republic, well, not so bright. We should absolutely be paying attention to what is happening in other countries and other Western civilizations as the foundations of these civilizations start to crumble. as we see the costs of unmitigated immigration to those countries. Because you cannot live in that secular, sacred utopia where all religions are equal and every idea is valid. It just doesn't exist in reality. Oh, we can sing about it. John Lennon can imagine all he wants. But the reality is that there are different ideologies that do not mesh well. Islam, Christianity, they don't mix well. Unless the Islam is benign and the Christianity is devout, then they're perfectly fine. But when Islam comes, and it is coming, you will see the same thing happening in America, in the UK right now, will be happening in our country. Vote accordingly, because your future freedoms and your children's freedoms are at stake. Now for some really good news as we wrap up the Olympics.
Really good. That's really good news.
It's good.
A couple of moments from the Olympics that really warmed my heart and made me proud to be an American. Can you think about that idea of being proud to be American? I haven't felt that for a long time. I know our country fights itself. I know we've got the left and the right. I know we've got our different political opinions. But as much of a disaster as the opening ceremony was for the Olympics, the American Olympic team really made us proud. I was watching with my wife, particularly the track and field events. They were wonderful. Our track and field team dominated the entire sport. It was amazing to watch. And many of our Christian brothers and sisters shined for our country and won gold and then represented the faith well. Most notably of all is one Sydney McLaughlin. And here is one of her Instagram posts. Quote, "Let me start off by saying what an honor it is to be able to represent not only my country, but also the kingdom of God. What I have in Christ is far greater than what I have or don't have in life. I pray my journey may be a clear depiction of submission and obedience to God, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it doesn't seem possible. He will make a way out of no way, not for my own gratification, but for his glory. I have never seen God fail in my life, in anyone's life for that matter. Just because I may not win every race or receive every one of my heart's desires does not mean God had failed. His will is perfect, and he has prepared me for a moment such as this, that I may use the gifts he has given me to point all the attention back to him. Two-time Olympian, Olympic champion, world record holder. Thank you, God." Praise hands or prayer hands. Sydney McLaughlin representing Christ incredibly well. And that's our job, church. Even if the election doesn't go our way, even if we see things continue to go poorly in a sense of how this country is governed, we have to run our race. We have to live for God's glory. God got glory out of Daniel when he was thrown into the lion's den. God got glory out of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they were thrown into the fiery furnace. God got glory from Pharaoh as he dominated and subjected the Israelites to 400 years of slavery and torture. God gets glory no matter what we try to do. Christians understand that ultimately our lives are for his glory. So if our country turns around, may it turn around for his glory. If not, may we, the church, shine for his glory, regardless of the results of the election. I say this because we can get so fired up about the potential harms that potential candidates could bring to our governing and the systems by which we enjoy our religious freedoms presently. But ultimately, God is in charge. And should he call upon Christians in this society someday to suffer for their faith, to stand strong in the face of persecution, may we do so with a smile on our face, not repaying evil for evil, but actually repaying good for the evil we receive. Because we are called, we forget this a lot, but we are called to suffer for his name's sake. At the same time, I believe it is absolutely necessary for every Christian to engage the political process, to know what each candidate stands for, and then to vote accordingly, aligned with Christian convictions and biblical truth. Now to another moment at the Olympics that actually kind of stirred my heart. There was this very, very touching moment for me where Brittney Griner of the U.S. women's basketball team cried tears of joy after she won gold for the U.S. team. Now, you might remember Brittney Griner was released from a Russian prison after unintentionally smuggling marijuana into Russia and then breaking the law and then being sentenced to 9 years of hard labor in a Russian prison. And yes, President Biden got her out. Of course, her release cost us the merchant of death, to get her out of that country. But this is absolutely nice to see, and I have no problem saying this as a Christian minister. I understand that Brittney Griner is not a Christian. She, I think, is an openly lesbian individual married to a woman. I don't agree with her on a lot of other things. But she did formally resent America. She did formally chastise and criticize America. She did formally speak ill of this country, and now she weeps as she understands how precious it is to be an American citizen. Even though I don't agree with Brittney on many things, I can celebrate this moment for her as it reminds us how precious it is, how wonderful it is to live in a country where, for at least now, freedom of speech and expression is still allowed, and that's why I bring this content to you. Now, on a more humorous note, for some reason, they thought that breakdancing should be an Olympic event. And we were introduced to the world was introduced to Rachel, and they are not going to be part of the 2028 Olympics in LA going forward. And that's a pretty smart move on LA's part or the Olympics part, because after all, LA is, I think, the home of breakdancing, and it would be really shameful to see such interesting moves to be displayed in the home of breakdancing in the Olympic stage. Okay, anyway, that is the show. Thank you guys for watching. We got a lot more content to talk about when it comes to Tim Walz concerning his views on religious freedom. So you want to participate in that by joining the Dependables membership plans. $10 a month is as little as it takes to be part of that right now. If you go all the way up to the $60 legacy level, you get free gifts from me on a regular basis. In fact, they just got a free t-shirt from me, and I am so appreciative of our legacy members. My book, Ending Emptiness, is out. Check it out over at endingemptiness.com. Oh, by the way, that free gift that they got was God Over Government. That's available at our swag shop, timhatchliveshop.com. When you support us, we support Project Rescue and the American Bible Society. That's the show for now. I will join the Dependables right now on the extra content. Otherwise, have a great night.